So now that we've got to this stage, how do we add this to a live action plate in a convincing way? So we'll want to pre-compose the fire because we can't just add a plate into this composition because of all the effects layers that we've got. So we'll want to create a new composition and we'll just call that export comp. And what's quite simple is that you can just now go to your compositions and we can just drag the fire particles comp into the new composition that you've created. And because it's all procedurally generated, it will already have an alpha channel. And you won't even have to use a blending mode with the fire. So let's actually set something. Okay, I've got this background image here that I want to try and composite the fire onto. So there's a couple of cool, neat little tricks we can do. So our export comp here is 1920 by 1080p. Okay, so this is what we've got so far. We, of course, most of the time you'd have no choice but to use a blending mode here. The problem with using a blending mode is it's going to be a little bit difficult to preserve all of the detail. If we keep the blending mode on normal, we can actually start manipulating this to create more realistic effects. So the first thing we were going to want to do, rather than simply adding extra effects to the fire, like, you know, additional glows, we might want to just ask ourselves, what kind of effect would this fire have on our shot if we were really there with a camera? And when you introduce a bright sort of image or a light into you know, like a live action plate, the camera's going to automatically adjust the exposure. It's either going to choose to keep the fire exposed or it's going to keep the background exposed. So it's, unless you're doing some kind of crazy HDR, it's going to be photographically impossible for the fire to be exposed and also for the bright spots of the sky to be exposed. So one of them is going to have to give. So this is what we can do. This is just a photograph here, and you're going to have a hard time selling that as believable. There's a few little tricks we can do just to make this look a little bit more photographic. We create an adjustment layer, and then we add a fast blur. We'll go repeat edge pixels here, and we'll just add a fast blur of 100. Now what we can do is we can change the blending mode to soft light, and this is going to allow some of the brighter parts of the image to spill over into the darker parts. Now, to prevent this from becoming over saturated, let's put a tint here, because we don't want to add extra color vibrancy into the image. We just want to try and start making it look more photographic. Now, and we can take this a step further. We can go create a solid. We'll just really quickly put a fractal noise effect here. And if we, let's say, increase this all the way up, put the complexity down, could slightly adjust with the brightness here. We don't want to completely, we are basically going to use this fractal noise as a luminance matte for the adjustment layer that we just created. So if we add some evolution here with a time expression of, say, 25, as you can see here. So basically the way I figured it is the camera's not going to be able to keep the exposure level perfectly consistent all the time, not when clouds are moving and there's subtle changes in the lighting. Well, this will allow us to essentially simulate that, especially if we add a little bit of offset turbulence as well. I'm just going to go forward 10 frames just so I can more precisely control this. Well, look what happens when we go to our adjustment layer and we tell it to use that fractal noise as a luminance map. So now if we do a preview render and we play this back, it's probably not going to be, it's going to be quite a subtle effect. It's going to be more noticeable if you play it back at a faster speed. But if we scrub through this, I'm not sure if you can see that. I'm going to just increase the I'm going to exaggerate the effect temporarily, just so we can more clearly see what's happening. For example, over here, we can see what almost looks like a shadow moving across. Definitely looks like something is changing. There's a shadow changing over here. But basically we've gone from that to that, and then this effect is then further being animated, so straight away that's going to take a still image and it's going to add some sort of dynamic exposure changes across the frame. Okay, so how are we going to use that to make the fire look more realistic? Well, we're going to create another layer. We're going to make an adjustment layer. I'm going to choose the effect blur and sharpen, and we're going to choose a compound blur. And if we were to say set this to maybe 50, and then we invert the blur, you can see it's doing more than simply blurring the image. It's it almost gives the impression that the entire image is like filled with smoke. But now we can use this. If we then go and create an elliptical mask here, and then we just feather that out by about 300. And then we can set this to also be a soft light. Let's also copy our tint here as well, because we don't want to mess with the vibrancy. So let's see what this one's doing. So we've suddenly added this fire into the middle of the shot, and it's changing the exposure. So we essentially started off with this, we made the image look more photographic, and now we're adding an effect that simulates the exposure change of the fire. We could also duplicate that layer again, but put the blending mode to normal. And let's just, if you do duplicate a compound blur, you are going to have to re-specify the layer that you want to use, in this case adjustment layer 9. And I'm wondering if there isn't a way we can put this behind our fire and use it as a way to sort of, I mean, for example, if there was fire in the shot here, there's no way you'd be able to see behind the fire here. So I'm thinking we could bring back some of the vibrancy here with that effect. And now we can control the luminance of that with our particle system here. So if we duplicate the particle system, and we're going to use the particles as a sort of luminance map for that adjustment layer. So we'll go and put a fast blur on here. And we'll also add a glow as well. And just so we don't get confused, let's put a tint on there so we know that this is just a luminance matte. Okay, so let's tell this adjustment layer to use the fire as a luminance matte. Probably going to work better without the glow on second thoughts. let's have a little look at what that's doing. If we just hide some of the other effects. So we're basically putting this adjustment behind the fire. It's difficult to sort of describe what it's doing. It's sort of blurring it, creating a sort of a smudgy sort of heat smearing effect. And that's just going to help sell our effect. Again, it's quite a subtle effect, but we can really see what it's doing around the edges. You would expect the black levels to sort of get lifted when such a bright source of light is put on top of them. Okay, so let's take this a step further, and we'll add a little bit of heat distortion to the background. We should probably start naming some of these adjustment layers here, so we'll call this one right. So let's just add a turbulent displacement effect here. Just choose 15 for the amount, 25 for the size. Let's just solo these layers. Okay, so if we add some evolution here, go time times 150, I'll randomize the evolution. We'll also put a keyframe the offset turbulence value here. Just drag that up. Let's have a little look at what our turbulence is doing. Probably want that to be increased a lot more, so let's drag that up even more. Drag this one down. Want quite a rapid, oh yeah, there we go. That really does look like heat distortion is rising. We could probably increase the complexity of it a little bit. Nice. And then we're going to use our, let's even name this. So this was the duplicate of our particle system that we were using as a mat. So let's also use that to control the opacity of that distortion. Just so you can see what's going on, I'm going to temporarily increase the distortion. So now the distortion is just going to be affected around where the particles are. So if we increase this blur radius a little bit more, in this case we probably are going to want to boost up the luminance value here a little bit. Okay, so we might have gone a little bit overboard with the distortion. Let's put that down. Bring this up just a little bit. Yeah, I think that's going to work pretty well. So we can actually take this one step further with some lens effects. Now I've got these lens assets here. And we're going to be using these. So we've got one here. Let's just bring these down into size. So we've got this lens dirt image, which you can actually download for free from Action VFX. They have this really cool free lens dirt overlays section here. So I just downloaded that pack. And then I've also got this. It's stock footage of sort of a lens light leak. I mean, you can find light leaks, real lens flares, lots of different places you can download them, but I got this specific one from Video Hive, and it's the pack's called Real Lens Flares pack. So I just downloaded that. Of course, you could get the lens flares from a different place if you've got some other ones in mind. I just prefer using this method because unless you're prepared to spend some extra time fiddling around with lens flares, it can be quite it can be an extra step to really sort of get the lens flare you want. And this is less defined, so I'm going to be overlaying the lens flare here. First I'll just put a color correction on it, a tritone. I'm just going to make it more of an orangey color so it matches our fire. And then I'm just going to change the blending mode to screen. So if it looks a little bit too intense, we can also try putting levels on it. So we can just change the overall gamma of the levels adjustment here. Could also experiment with some different blending modes. I wouldn't recommend any of them other than light and additive. So this one will hopefully, as the fire comes in, that's when our lens flare will start kicking in as well. Then we've also got this lens dirt. So again, I'll copy and paste the tritone effect onto the lens dirt. And basically we only want the lens dirt to be visible where the fire is. So again, we'll just duplicate this fire mat. We're just starting to stack stuff up on top of itself here. So we've got a fast blow on here, we've got a levels adjustment. Let's just boost the levels a little bit. And what we'll also do is I'm thinking if we put wiggle expression on the mat here, say wiggle expression of 15, and maybe something a little bit more subtle like that. So we want to try and get a flickering effect on our lens dirt here. I'm also going to reduce the opacity of the lens dirt here, and I'm just going to add another wiggle expression onto that. And we'll use the screen blending mode on our lens dirt here. A little bit concerned that our lens flare is going to blow things out a bit. Also, one other thing we could do is we've got this compound blur which we added. So this was supposed to just sort of make it so the fire adjusts the exposure here of the camera, but we could also put a little wiggle expression on here as well. Maybe just keep that quite subtle. We'll just put the opacity of the compound blur here, so now that value is going to fluctuate by 10. And I think we'll leave it there because we could keep going further. We could start adding lighting effects. We could add adjustment layers, putting lighting effects on all these rocks here. But I think the impressive thing is that we've just got this fire. We're not using a blending mode. We're not even color correcting the fire at all. We've got quite a cool looking effect. And remember, things might change up a bit when we put it to half res. I mean, back to full res. So once you're ready to render this out, we can go to Composition, Add to Render Queue, and then we can choose a format for it. So I'll go and choose a QuickTime format, an animation, and a PNG alpha is lossless. They'll generate huge file sizes but will preserve all of the detail, including an alpha channel, an MPEG 4 or slightly outdated H.264 here. Probably be quite suitable for smaller file sizes. But in this case, we're going for a middle ground. This is a good format for stock footage where you need the file size to be friendly, but you also need to preserve the quality as well. A little trade-off between the both of them. But as long as you keep this quality setting above 90 here, and we do not want to do any of the following. We don't want to mess with the working space here or start changing any of this stuff. Otherwise, you might end up changing the gamma level of, you might start embedding extra levels of gamma. I've noticed that I've experimented with these, and you'll render something out and it will actually have a slight, when you bring it back in, it'll actually have a slightly different gamma level. And if you've got some really kind of delicate levels, then you can actually sort of crunch out a lot of the detail and some of the shadows, some of the darker areas of the image. So I just like to keep those settings as they are. Give that a name. Give that name, save it as Flamethrower comp. Okay, I'll render this out, we'll have a look at it. Okay, and so once that's rendered, let's take a look at our final effect. Yeah, so it's looking pretty good. There's obviously a few things we could tweak with it, like I said, with the lighting. Could also add a bit of camera move to it. Okay, we'll wrap things up there. Stay tuned for more content and be sure to let us know what you want to see in the comments, and thanks for watching.